I found you guys this time, so that's good, nice. Great. I'm just changing the chat bar a little so we have a bigger presentation space. So to start with, I'm doing fine, thank you. It's actually a nice day today outside, so we'll be going outside on our breaks. All right, so I thought we'd maybe start with just a small review of what we did yesterday. The most important thing in taking the class with Prep Expert is to make sure that you actually remember the strategies and that you try to use them, right? To use them, you have to remember them. So remembering comes perhaps. Anybody remember any of the big strategies we talked about yesterday? Anything that sounded like a good idea to you? Chunks for the reading, absolutely. So that was probably the biggest strategy we talked about for the reading. So chunk approach. Yes, bottom-up math. We did talk about BOSS, so building your own simple solution to answer problems, to questions, so that you're not tricked by wrong yet enticing answers. What else? Anything else you guys remember? PKP, yeah, passages key point. So basically finding the key point of what you're reading because there's so many main idea questions. We actually say the PKP is the BOSS solution to the question, what is the main idea of the passage? Substitute abstracts with tangibles, absolutely. So that's back with the math. Substitute abstracts with tangibles and substituting abstracts in the problem. So these are kind of the same strategy, it just depends if you need to pull out the numbers from thin air or if the numbers are kind of given to you in the problem. Annotate paragraphs. Yes, annotate because we want to make sure we're as involved with possible with what we're reading, right? So we don't drift off and forget and have to reread, which takes up too much time. How about for the writing section? Do you guys remember any of the strategies we talked about there? Decided to change. Yeah, to cross out prepositions. It was called COP. So cross out prepositions just because it can be helpful to simplifying a sentence and actually seeing where the error might be. It helps you see verb disagreement, verb-noun disagreement, that sort of stuff. Logan, yes, make sure to read the entire passage instead of cherry picking the lines that have questions attached to them because it is necessary for you to understand the writing passages because they will ask questions such as, should you remove this, should you add this, blah, 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 blah. So yes, very nice. Okay, I think that's a pretty good overview of the main points we talked about. Did anybody have any questions they wanted to ask? Or are you ready to just keep moving on here? What did SAP stand for? Substitute answers in the problem. So SAT stood for substitute abstracts with tangibles, which basically means that you need to come up with the numbers that you want to plug in. Like maybe that's when we said 2 might be a good go-to. And SAP was like if, you actually plug in answer choices, or if you plug in coordinate points that were given to you in the problem, that would be substituting answers in the problem. Do I know when the recordings will be up? Great question. They're usually up the following Monday. I am not sure the status, considering that it's Memorial Day tomorrow, but I will ask Susan. At the latest, they would be up Tuesday, but hopefully they will be up tomorrow. I've sent them in for them to load. And if you, Eleanor, make sure if you don't see them on Tuesday morning, because I know when you wake up, that's the first thing you want to check, is you could call the prep expert office and make sure that, or send me an email and I'll let them know that it's urgent to put those up. Caroline, in the reading portion, do we read the entire passage in one or split it up, and how should we split them up? So yes, the premise of the chunk approach was to say you don't want to read it all at once because it's kind of information overload. So you might remember, and we'll probably have time to go over kind of a more detailed something or other today. If you have a test, the first thing you should do, you guys might remember, or does anybody remember for the chunk approach what we should do first? Check questions with assigned lines. Yes, look for line-cited questions. So basically, before I even start, I'll come over here and say, okay, are there some line-cited questions? Yep, so here, lines 1 through 2, 10 through 13. Let's see, what else? 30 through 31. This one has a lot, actually. 49 and 50. So I would see these are line-cited questions, and I would go and put little tick marks, or you can do it however you want. This is how I do it. I find line 2, I put a tick mark. I find line 13 and put a tick mark. I find line 31, 49, and 50. So I put a tick mark between 31, 49, and 50. So these you probably answer at the same time. But the chunks then that you should be reading in would be, you always want to read, finish the sentence you're on. So don't just stop because the line-cited question was a line 2 if the sentence doesn't end there. So maybe read just a little bit here as your first chunk. Then your second chunk, read a little bit past this line-cited question. Your third chunk, read to here or so. Fourth chunk to here. And then the last chunk would be to finish it. So the chunks that you read in are dictated by answering line-cited questions. The reason you can answer line-cited questions without having read the entire passage is because they're asking about specific parts of the passage. So here it's asking the meaning of this phrase. Here it's asking about the point of this sentence. And so you don't need to have finished the entire passage to be able to answer the line-cited questions. And it provides a nice way for you to break up the passage, have time to answer a question. When you take a break to answer a question, it allows the ideas to kind of sit in your mind. Everything that can kind of consolidate, and then you have a better understanding overall. So that's how you should break it up. And that's what the chunk approach, and it's like strategies 3 through 5 detail the chunk approach, which is all about reading with the line-cited questions guiding the chunks you make. Questions about that specifically? All right. So that was our demonstration. I think we're going to start with reading again. Oh, Caroline, will all the questions before the line questions be on those lines as well? What do you mean? Like, will? No, could you clarify your question a little bit? The questions that you don't answer, like question 1, question 2, question 5, question 6, question 7, you will answer these at the very, very end, if that helps to clarify. So, you know, I'll answer 3, 4, 8, 9, and 10 while I'm reading. And then at the end, after I finish the passage, I'll come back and answer the main idea, more broad questions, because it's likely that I will have needed to read everything in order to be able to answer them. Okay, yeah, so Caroline, come back at the very end and answer these. So there should be half to more than half of the questions at the end that you haven't answered. And those are the questions that you need to have a main broad idea of what's going on in order to be able to answer them. Okay. Okay. So let's just begin. We're going to do reading and writing now. We already finished the essay. I guess we didn't talk about any essay stuff, but basically we gave you the templates and you guys know what kind of writing or what kind of essay you're writing. It's going to be analytical. You're analyzing how the author made their argument, regardless of what their argument is. Okay? So, let's start with reading lesson. So we did a good overview of what we learned for reading yesterday. The rest of these tips will be a little bit easier to implement, okay? But there are things you have to remind yourself to do, once again. So, let's face it, SAT reading passages are pretty boring. I mean, depends on who you are. Maybe you find this stuff riveting, but most students would rather read something else. So one reason students score poorly is a lack of interest. Why is it that when you read an article your friend posts on Facebook, you can almost always remember exactly what the article was about? I don't know if that's true, because my friends on Facebook post some pretty terrible articles. But why do you remember everything from Harry Potter, but not from To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Level of interest. Maybe some of you guys like To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm not judging it. But basically, when you're interested, you remember everything that you read, right? So to increase our comprehension of SAT reading passages, we need to increase our interest level in the passage. So it's hard to understand passages you're not interested in. We need to fake interest to increase our passage comprehension. So how can we do this? We need to try to be curious about the historical, science, literary, or social studies topic that we're discussing. More than anything, you can just act or read with a voice that at least sounds somewhat enthusiastic. Okay, so for instance, I'm going to read this in a very monotone voice first, and then in a very excited voice, and you'll see what a difference it makes. So, $1.87. That was all. 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with a silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealings implied. 3 times double counted it, $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. How could you possibly expect to understand that passage if you read it like I just did, right? Quickly, monotone, yada, yada, yada. Not very useful. But what if I say $1.87? That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealings implied. 3 times Della counted it, $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. Wow! Now I really know what's going on because I read it with so much enthusiasm. Right? So this is an easy thing to implement as long as you remember. Maybe you'll get halfway through the passage and realize that you're no longer reading with interest. So take a step back and reacquaint yourself because you're going to want to read with interest the whole time. So which read through did you understand better? Obviously the one that I read in an interesting way. So when you read with interest, you're engaged with the passage, and the more engaged you are, the better you comprehend it. So as you are reading the passage, you should have been very curious. Some of the questions that you may have been curious about as you're reading could include, how much is $1.87 in 1906? Is it like 20 bucks? Is it like 50 bucks? I know it's more than $1.87 now. What does bulldozing mean? Remember, that ended up being one of the questions that I asked later on. What does Della need the money for? Curiosity like this will keep you engaged with the passage. You might even anticipate future questions. Skip this. Personify the author. To increase your comprehension, personify the author. So this is just another way to get more interested in the passage. If you personify the author, you'll be able to do this. So just as the last strategy was to help us increase our understanding of SAT reading passages, this strategy should do the same. So many reading passages are written by an opinionated narrator. By giving the narrator a personality, you will view the passage through the author's eyes. And this will ultimately increase comprehension. Okay? So you want to, sometimes you'll know who the author is, sometimes you'll have no idea. But if it gives you a time period and a topic, you could kind of construct an author and give them an outfit and walk with them through the text. So we won't do the next one, but I'm going to read to you the little snippet, which I advise you always read to get the right amount of context. So this is a transcript, a part of the inaugural speech of JFK, given on January 20th, 1961. After addressing citizens of the United States and those of countries which were allies, Kennedy then turns his message to countries which held a more antagonistic role. Okay, so I can get a pretty good idea what's going on from this, right? I'm thinking 1961, that means my mom was 2 years old. But I'm picturing like black and white TV, JFK on the podium. We can tell that this is the Cold War, so we can tell that the adversaries are the Russians. Maybe you're picturing whoever the Russian prime minister was at that time, or the Soviet Union, head of the Soviet Union was, because I'm pretty sure Stalin was dead at this point. So it's the next guy. Anyways, you can have all these things. You can be thinking space race, you can be thinking Sputnik, cosmonaut. There's all sorts of things that could come to mind and make you maybe feel interested about it, okay? So if you read the rest of this speech in that context, you're going to get a lot more out of it than if you had just approached this having no background information. So that's why it's useful to read this. All right, next up is one of my favorite strategies. I really like this one. And this is just like a small change of mindset that you can take on that will really change the way you approach answer choices, okay? So we should know that 75% of all reading answer choices are incorrect, right? That's a good way to think about it because we are often thinking about looking for the one answer choice that is correct and not thinking about how 75% of the answer choices are incorrect. So what we need to be doing is going and figuring out what's wrong with answer choices instead of trying to figure out what's right about answers. Okay? So if you think about in science, for instance, in science, when we have a theory, right, a scientific theory, they're theories because they're hard to prove beyond a doubt for any case, for all situations, blah, 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 right? So the Big Bang Theory. So although there's all this evidence to support it, at what point does it become 100% true? Right? It's hard to say. But if I wanted to refute the Big Bang Theory and I could give one piece of evidence that made it wrong, then the whole thing would be wrong, right? So in science and in math, for instance, if you're trying to prove something, it's much easier to disprove something than to prove it, right? So that should be our mindset with questions, with answer choices on the SAT. So instead of trying to prove that one answer is better than the other, we should be looking for why one answer is not correct. So if I'm down to 2 answer choices, I should be saying, got to be a word here that makes this wrong. If I think about this literally, does it still seem right? So you have to be very mindful, very careful, very deliberate and go through this, and we can kind of figure out perhaps something that makes one of the answer choices wrong, okay? Because for an answer choice to be right, it has to be 100% right. So this is just a small change of mindset. I think it's really effective. You guys make sure to write this down. Make sure to remind yourself to do this, because challenging and attacking answer choices is a great way to get better at answering questions. So if you're somebody that always picks the wrong answer when you're between two things, this would be a strategy that would be very useful to you. Okay. Avoid justification. So this is really similar to attack answer choices. So justification of answer choices is why many students struggle. So this strategy is the sister strategy to the previous one. We know students doubt themselves. They're like, maybe I don't fully understand the passage, and that's why I think it's probably this answer, even though I don't remember that. So in order to avoid justification, you need to require perfect answers. This means every word of an answer choice must be 100% correct. Now let that sink in, okay? Every single word combined with every other word in the answer must make perfect sense. If we take it at face value, if I take it literally, it has to make sense, okay? So make sure this is related to attacking answer choices, but if you find yourself saying something like, oh, I suppose the author could have been trying to say, or I guess that could be in the passage, or maybe the author was trying to convey, if you use justifications like that, you're on the wrong track. You need to take a step back and say, okay, wait, what am I actually trying to say? Okay. And I told you the reading and writing strategies are going to go by a lot more quickly now. Since we're just on the since we're just looking at the strategies themselves. So hopefully you guys will get some time to practice with this sometime this week. And like I said, we'll probably have time, maybe the last hour today, to do a practice section. We can decide which one we want to do together. Okay, eliminate excess. Eliminating excess refers to communicating the author's message in the most succinct way possible. Now, just so you guys know, we're back to writing. I don't think I said that. This is a vocab word. Succinct means concise, just so you guys know. But the SAT writing section does want you to give clear, concise answers. Shorter is sweeter. You can remember that. Shorter answer choices are more likely to be correct. If you convey the same idea in less words, that's a good thing. If you've actually changed the meaning of something because you've made it shorter, then that's probably not a good thing. But anytime you can eliminate redundancy, say something with fewer words, that's good to go. Okay, so eliminate excess, shorter is sweeter. Economy of words means using few words to convey a message. Repeated ideas refers to the redundancy of ideas within the same paragraph. So you want to avoid both being very wordy. You can think about like dancing around the subject, trying to explain it, but you can't quite get it right. And then you have one sentence that really nails it. Then you don't need all the excess language, right? So for instance, you wouldn't want to repeat these ideas in the same sentence. I wouldn't want to say repeat again in the same sentence. I wouldn't want to say may and possibly in the same sentence. I wouldn't want to say quickly and soon in the same sentence. I wouldn't want to say promptly and quickly in the same sentence because they all mean the same thing and it would be redundant and unnecessary. Okay? So let's look here. The pianist wrote a beautiful musical piece with the intent being to show respect for his father's classic work. Does anybody see the redundancy or what's excess in this sentence? Intent and being. Yeah. Intent being to show. So it should be, you know, the pianist wrote a beautiful musical piece. We could even pick out this whole thing. To show respect for his father's classic work. Okay. That would make it much more clear and concise, less wordy. That's what we're looking for. Right, how about the next one? Annually, Forbes magazine recognizes 30 individuals under 30 years old in a special edition magazine called 30 Under 30 each year. What do you guys think here? What's redundant? Each year. Yeah, so don't let the 30s trick you, and I'll explain why. So each year is redundant because we have annually. The 30 under 30, both of these are necessary, right? Because if I just said Forbes magazine recognizes 30 individuals under 30 years old in a special magazine called 30 Under 30, if I didn't say that this was 30 individuals under 30, I wouldn't know what 30 under 30 meant. You know, it could be 30 restaurants under $30 per plate, 30 towels for $30. Who knows? You know, so this is necessary because it defines this. So just because something is repeated doesn't necessarily mean that it's redundant. So the 30 is repeated here, but it's not redundant because I need it to understand the context of what 30 Under 30 magazine represents. Okay. The SAT exam has never been more easier than after the redesign in 2016. What's redundant here? Yeah, easier is already comparative, right? So we don't need more. Use logical transitions. So transitions are word phrases that connect the flow of ideas. On the SAT, transitions will often be used inappropriately. These errors sound like they would be easy to spot. So using a transition, so maybe using the word however when I should have said furthermore, because those kind of mean the opposite, right? However means you're changing to a contrasting idea. Furthermore means you're going more along the same path. So the deal with this is if you're writing yourself, then you know what transition to use because you understand the flow of ideas that you're writing about, right? But if you're reading what somebody else has written, and you're not really paying that much attention to how everything fits together, then it's very, very easy to mistake however and furthermore, or to see them being used incorrectly and not notice, right? Because they don't sound wrong. They only sound wrong if you understand the context, okay? So anytime there's a transitions, you should pay lots of attention because they won't sound wrong if they're incorrect. Okay? So on the SAT, transitions will often be used inappropriately. This is more of a clarity issue than a grammatical error. Look, we have an error here. More of a clarity issue. Since SAT writing is now in paragraphs, you must master transitions. It's essential that you understand the passage or else you're not going to know how the transition or what transition would be appropriate. So you must understand when to use conjunctions. Because is used to explain, furthermore is used to give additional information, consequently is used to indicate repercussions, etc. So we're going to look at this more closely coming up. So there are two types of transitions within sentences and between them. So an author may connect ideas within the same sentence, or an author may connect ideas between two different sentences. If a transition occurs within the same sentence, then the transition is almost made via a conjunction. Okay. And if it's made between sentences, then a transition can be made via conjunction, punctuation, or phrase. So we will talk a lot about punctuation here, which is good. So you also need to understand independent versus dependent clauses. An independent clause is a sentence that can stand on its own. A dependent clause is a phrase that doesn't quite cut it as a sentence. It's either missing a subject or a verb. Okay, so let's talk about coordinate conjunctions. So coordinate conjunctions connect two complete sentences. All right, so he looks very athletic, yet he does not run fast. So the comma followed by yet in this case is the conjunction. So by definition, a conjunction is a comma followed by one of those fanboys. You guys may have learned this acronym: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And so what you need to know for a conjunction is that they are two complete sentences. So if instead I wrote, oops, I thought I was typing. That is a correct sentence, and this is a correct sentence. In the first sentence, I'm not using yet as a conjunction because I don't have two complete sentences, so I don't use the comma. In the second sentence, I'm using yet as a conjunction because I have two complete sentences and I have to connect them with a conjunction. So in this case, here, this is a conjunction. This is just being used as a transition word, okay? So make sure you know the difference there, okay? Subordinated conjunctions connects one independent clause and one dependent clause, okay? So if I say something like, because of the rain, the soccer game was canceled. The soccer game was canceled is my independent clause. Because of the rain is my dependent clause. And one of the ways we can use a comma is connecting an independent to a dependent clause or a dependent clause to an independent clause. Just keep in mind that you cannot connect two independent clauses with just a comma. And that's called a comma splice error, which we'll talk about more. But one way we use a comma is in a conjunction. Another way is to connect an independent and dependent clause. Okay. Double conjunctions, a term that's kind of made up, but we define double conjunction as a term where two conjunctions are placed next to each other. So, and thus, and therefore, but so, but yeah, but therefore. So these are all extremely redundant. And so anytime you see something like this, it's likely wrong. Because it's redundant. Conjunctive adverbs. Similar to coordinate conjunctions, conjunctive adverbs connect to independent clauses, but they usually come at the beginning of a sentence. So, however, you don't need to memorize every conjunctive adverb. Furthermore, you should memorize some. So basically, you want a conjunctive adverb to start a sentence, and if it does, it should have a comma after. So conjunctive adverbs are connected to a sentence with commas. If a conjunctive adverb is in the middle of a sentence, it should have a semicolon before and a comma after. Or it may have a comma before and after. So preferably, these are used at the beginning of a sentence. So what it's saying is we use it at the beginning of a sentence or after a semicolon, which semicolon is basically the same thing as a period. So it'd still be the beginning of a sentence. However, sometimes you might see it in the middle of the sentence separated by two commas. That was not incorrect, but it's not preferable. Preferably, we'd like to have these at the beginning of a sentence. Correlative conjunctions always go together. So this is kind of talking, I really think only these first four are kind of important. If I say either, then there should be an or somewhere else, right? Either this or that. Neither this nor that. Not only this, but also that. Not just this, but also that. So these are just common correlative conjunctions. They're basically just transitions that usually go, or that do go together. So as we discussed, conjunctions are a common way to transition within the same sentence. However, conjunctions are also a common way to transition between two sentences. Let's examine the following. Finding experts with specialized knowledge is even more difficult. Nevertheless, Launching a new biotech firm to develop an orphan biopharmaceutical or therapy utilizing an emerging gene therapy may prove difficult due to the limited number of experts in the field. Did anything sound wrong to my ear in this sentence? No. But if I look more closely, I realize that these two sentences are saying the same thing. It's difficult. May prove difficult. So, do I want to have something that indicates contrast? No, I probably want to use something like furthermore additionally because I'm adding to this idea of difficulty. But you can see just to your ear, it didn't sound too bad the way I read it, right? And that's because we didn't understand fully the context. And if we didn't understand fully the context, then it's hard for us to notice when the transition is not the correct transition word. Okay. Flow of ideas. Transitioning between two sentences requires that you really understand the flow. In order to do this, you must pay close attention to the author's message. So, most travelers go hiking early in the morning before the sun comes out, when it is still cool out. For example, some people are just not early risers. Do these two things really go together? Does it make sense to say when it is still cool out between these two sentences when we're talking about people not getting up early? No. So that's more about flow of ideas. This might sound more awkward, especially if their ideas really don't flow together. So Cheryl was exhausted and worn out at mile 20, and she continued running to finish the marathon. Any idea what might be a problem here? What can we do to make this sentence better? The and, yes. Maybe make this a contrasting word like but, yes. Because it's a contrast, right? She was exhausted, but continued to finish the marathon. Great. Because the motorcycle was traveling at a speed of around 120 miles per hour, this meant almost no car could catch up with the bike. What do you guys think? There's actually some redundancy in here. Remove this meant? Yes, absolutely, Maggie, because and this meant pretty much mean the same thing. So we could say, because the motorcycle was traveling at a speed of around 120 miles per hour, almost no car could catch up with the bike. So we have a dependent clause attached to an independent clause here with a comma. In the third sentence, not only was the design of the airplane visually appealing, but it was aerodynamic. Yes, so not only, but also we said anytime we have not only, you want to make sure you also have but also. So not only was the design of the airplane visually appealing, but also aerodynamic. Very nice. All right, next up is, oh, so Caroline. Yeah, that's a good point. That's something else that we could probably, and worn out is kind of probably too casual to be put in writing. That's one of the words that we use when we speak. So it might be better to say Cheryl was exhausted at mile 20, but she continued running to finish the marathon. That could be something to improve the clarity of the sentence. Good catch. Improve paragraph cohesion. So this is why we have to read the entire passage, right? Because paragraphs on the SAT writing are not always organized, and sometimes we might need to add, remove, keep, or move a sentence. So we must identify when a sentence is out of place, move to another part of the passage, or removed altogether. And the strategy is relevant when a whole sentence is underlined. Okay? So what my recommendation for this is to try to kind of anticipate when they might ask you something about paragraph cohesion, because you can till they're going to ask you if you should add, remove, keep, or move something when you see that lines are becoming numbered, right? They'll start like saying, calling this sentence 1, sentence 2. And basically what that should be an indication of is that you should be paying attention. And if you're paying attention while you read, you might catch the error before they ask about it, right? So if you are preemptively trying to find the wrong part of or what should be moved, removed, added, etc., then you'll have an easier time once you see the answer choices or the question. Check pronoun precision. Pronoun errors are one of the most common grammar errors. So common pronouns, he, her, him, I, it, me, she, them, their, they, us, we, you. Substitutes for a noun, right? Pronoun errors are often hard to spot for many students because we misuse pronouns in everyday language. Very true. For example, we might be talking about the author of a book and later refer to the author as they. Do you remember when they killed off Harry Potter? That didn't actually happen. That was not a spoiler. But you might be using they as in the author, and if we take it literally, it doesn't make sense. So pronouns must agree with the nouns they are referring to. When you see a pronoun underlined on the SAT writing section, you must make sure there is one and only one logical noun that it can be referring to. So what you need to know. The SAT will sometimes refer to a singular noun with a plural pronoun. So if I say Jake and Andre wanted to become, should be lawyers when they grow up, because it's and. So this should be Jake and Andre wanted to become lawyers when they grow up. It says tricky singular plural pronouns. High school is an it because it's a one thing. High schools would be their. United States is its. States are plural, so it's their. Business accounts is apparently confusing, but business accounts are plural. We talked about lost pronouns, right? It was amazing how beautiful the sky was, or how colorful the sky was. It was bittersweet to see Courtney graduate. What does it stand for? It does not refer to anything. So we would want to rewrite this sentence and say, seeing Courtney graduate was bittersweet. Eleanor, yes, with or. Or would imply singular, yeah. So Jake or Andre wanted to become a lawyer. Good catch. Relative pronouns. Relative pronouns must be used in specific context. Who, use when you'd use he. Whom when you'd use him. We're going to talk about this more coming up, so if this is confusing, don't worry. We'll try to clarify who and whom a little bit. When refers to a time, where to a place, which usually refers to a noun, and just so you know, which almost always comes with a comma in front of it. The average student got a perfect SAT score, which was not expected by anyone. So you can see the comma which here. Subject versus object pronouns, and this is when we'll talk a little bit more about who and whom. So subject pronoun, object pronoun. So a subject pronoun is I. Object pronouns are me. Okay, so the difference here is that subject pronouns do an action. And object pronouns receive an action. Okay, so for instance, I could say something like, I gave it to her. She gave it to him. we gave it to them, but I can't say them gave it to we, or me gave it to she, right? These do an action, these receive an action, okay? So for the most part, these are pretty obvious to us, which one we should use in which case. Except for with who and whom, because we don't use whom enough in everyday speech for it to sound correct. So there's a couple things you can remember with whom. The first thing is that whom can't come before a verb, right? Because it can't do an action. So I can't say the boy whom went to the store, because he can't went anywhere, because he can't do a verb. So whom can't come before a verb. Whom usually comes after a preposition. We already talked about preposition. Right? So, for example, to whom, for whom, of whom. Those are common ways to use whom. But the way that was mentioned on the other page here is that use who when you'd use he and use whom when you'd use him. That's actually a really great strategy, because who is a subject pronoun just like he, and whom is an object pronoun just like him. So if you're reading a sentence and you can't figure out if you would use who or whom, then see if you would use he or him. And sometimes a sentence will sound weird because it won't be, maybe they're talking about something plural, then you could try they and them. But try one of these pairs. Obviously, you doesn't work because in English we have the same subject pronoun as object pronoun for you. But try to substitute the word and see, would I use he here or would I use him? If you would use he, then you would pick who. If you would use him, then you would pick whom. So that's a little trick that works pretty well. So yeah. So furthermore, subject pronoun is any pronoun that can fly a kite. An object pronoun is any pronoun that a kite can be flown by. The kite was flown by them. And that's why object pronouns are often indicative of passive voice, right? It's not I played tennis, it was tennis was played by me. You can see why. It's because you're receiving something when you're in the object pronoun form. So that often indicates a passive voice, which you try to avoid. All right, next up is ambiguous pronouns. So ambiguous pronouns are not lost. It's just that they're not specific enough. So, for instance, Mark and Michael were both excited to compete in the basketball tournament, but he was certainly the better player. So is he referring to Mark or Michael? We're not sure. So this is not a lost pronoun, right? Like it does refer to something. We just don't know what it refers to. So let's do some examples. Listening to the new album, Mike, Brian, and me were so impressed with the artist's singing ability. Any ideas what the air is here? Yes. So would I say, listening to the new album, me were so impressed? No, this should be I. I was so impressed with the artist's singing ability, but since we're in a group, now it's going to be were. Very nice. The patient suffered extreme grievances. This resulted from a physician's arrogance. Ideas here. What pronoun problem do we have? Yeah, Eleanor, that's a great way to fix it, would be to put the comma which. Because this is the ambiguous pronoun in this case. We don't know what it refers to. We could also say these grievances, right? Be another way to fix it. Ricardo was an artist that was able to become famous at it. So it should be pretty easy. What is our pronoun problem here? It is a lost pronoun. Yes, and then actually in this case it's not lost because it does refer to something. It could refer to art or piano or something like that. It's only lost if there's like a word that I couldn't actually substitute in. And if that's the case, then we need to kind of rewrite the whole sentence. Now, that doesn't really matter. I'm not going to ask you the difference between a lost and ambiguous. But in general, lost means if I had to pick a word to go there, I couldn't do it. Ambiguous means I'm just not clear what I need to put here. There's several different things that could refer to. All right, punctuate appropriately. Okay, so because SAT writing is now made of passages, punctuation is more important than ever. I think I'm going to do my own punctuation because I'm pretty good at going through and making it pretty clear, I think, as to the punctuation you need to know. So let's start with a comma. There's really 5 big ways that we use the comma. The first is to set off quoted text. So that's to set off quoted text. Second way would be in a list. So I could say something like, I bought peppers, cherries, and spinach. So this is just in a list, right? And we need to all make sure that we are using the comma before the and, which is known as the Oxford comma. You guys might have heard of that before. It's in, I think it's like an APA format. You don't need to use the Oxford comma, but you want to use it because it does make everything more clear. Third way, you can use it to separate an independent and dependent clause, which we already talked about. So, you know, because of the rain, the game was canceled. Okay. The fourth way we can really use the comma would be in a conjunction. So that's a comma before any of the fanboys, right? That's what comprises a conjunction. And we must have two complete sentences, right? And then, let's see, the fifth way to use the comma. Let's see if I can figure out what we're missing here. Oh, to separate parenthetical extra information in the sentence. So, comma, we call it fluffy information, comma. So basically stuff that could be taken out, removed from the sentence, and the sentence would still make sense. So, Chelsea, comma, the girl teaching your class, comma, enjoy teaching class. A terrible sentence, but these are kind of the 5 main ways you'll see commas used. Okay. Next up, let's talk about the semicolon. There are two ways we can use a semicolon. One is use it like a period. Right? So you can use it to separate two independent sentences. They're usually closely related, right? Okay. The other way we can use it is separate list items, which already have commas. So for instance, if I said something like, I went to the bakery which had cakes, scones, and bread. Okay. I used just commas here, right? That's nice. Because I just had a list item. But if I said something instead, like I went to the bakery which had delicate gluten-free cakes, I would separate my list items here with colons because my list items themselves, semicolons, because my list items themselves had commas. Crumbly and soft. Is that possible? Crumbly soft scones. And burnt old bread. Warm fresh. I don't know why I didn't use warm fresh. We're going with burnt old bread. So you can see here, since my list items went from having just commas to, from being just individual items here, cakes, scones, bread, to being delicate gluten-free cakes, crumbly soft scones, and burnt old bread. These are the list items now. And since the list items themselves have commas, because we can use a comma, I guess that's another way to use a comma, is to separate two adjectives that describe a noun. We can use a semicolon to be less confused, okay? However, this is much more, the first way to separate two complete sentences is much more common. So let's talk about the colon. What I'll say about the colon is there's two parts. So this is a colon. It looks like a semicolon except for there are two dots. And what is necessary for a colon is that you have a complete sentence before it. Okay, you have to have an independent clause before the colon. This is necessary. 100% necessary. But after the colon, it could be a list. It's often a list. It's often not. It could be an extra thought, an extra idea. It could be another sentence. It doesn't really matter. But before, it has to be a complete sentence. Okay, you have to have an independent clause, colon. It could be followed by pretty much anything. Okay, so I could say let's see, I bought several things at the store. Eggs, potatoes, and tomatoes. So as long as what comes before the colon is a complete sentence, that's good. That's all that is required. And then for a dash is used in two ways on the test. One, it can be used like a colon. So basically, you can have a complete sentence followed by a dash, and then afterwards you can have whatever. Or you can use it the same way you use 2 commas. So you can put extra information between two dashes. They're grammatically the same thing. It doesn't matter which one you use. You'll never be asked to decide between using 2 commas or 2 dashes. So the only thing you can't do is say you want to separate something in the middle of the sentence. You can't use 1 comma and 1 dash with the fluffy information between. That's wrong. Okay. So those are the main elements of punctuation. Let's go back to make sure I didn't miss anything. So you guys know how to use a period. Talked about a semicolon. Usually separates complete sentences, but could also separate list items that have commas. Mark jumps high. Michael jumps higher. Colon or dash, they usually introduce lists, but they could introduce something else, right? So you could have a colon, or you could have a dash. But remember, what's necessary is that you have a complete sentence before a colon or a dash, and afterwards, it's kind of open season. And a comma, most commonly used to separate modifiers. So in this way, this is a way of separating an independent and a dependent clause, which was one of the ways we gave, right? Having studied for the SAT all day, Megan was tired. Okay. So this would be the independent clause in this case. This would be the dependent clause. We can connect those with a comma. So we'll do one more. I think we have 2 more slides here, and then we'll take our first break. 3 more slides? No, 2 more slides. The book on ancient Roman history was fascinating, since I was going to visit there in the summer. Do I have 2 complete sentences the way it's currently written? No. So can I use a semicolon? No. So what I would probably do is, since I was going to visit there in the summer, comma, the book on ancient Roman history was fascinating. So I would probably move this to the beginning, because I can separate an independent and dependent sentence from one another. Or if I wanted to use a semicolon, I could have said, the book on ancient history was fascinating. I was going to visit there in summer. That might actually be better, because technically, we'll talk about misplaced modifiers later. If I say I was going to visit there in the summer, that's talking about Rome. So I should have my next word be Rome, not the book. And we'll talk about modifier errors later. So that first sentence I recommended wasn't really the best. So it's probably better. If I want to use a semicolon, this one word makes this a dependent clause. But if I get rid of it, it becomes an independent clause. We're good to go. There were 3 items that were absolutely essential for the trip: a toothbrush, a book, and a cell phone charger. Yep, very nice. So we have a complete sentence before we use a colon, followed by a list item. There was no doubt I was ready to fall asleep in class. The teacher even saw me put my head down on the desk. Can I separate 2 complete sentences with a comma? No. This is what we call a comma splice error. We could fix it in 3 ways. We could put a period, we could put a semicolon, or we could put a conjunction. Although a conjunction in this case might kind of sound weird. Yeah. All right. Performed by Luke Wilson, the poem Falling Leaves delivers a powerful message about the fleeting nature of happiness. Oh, I fixed it when I was reading it. Oops. I spoiled it. It should be delivers. I was like, where's the error in this? That is actually something common that people do, is your mind typically will fix things that you're reading. So sometimes you have to be super scrutinous. I don't think that's a word, but you know what I mean. Due to the fact of assembling teenagers from all parts of the country for the conference, what we have here is just a dependent clause. And due to the fact of, of assimilating teenagers just sounds pretty terrible. So I could say something instead like, because teenagers were assembling from all parts of the country for the conference, comma, there was no parking. So we should notice that this cannot stand on its own as a sentence. We need to add more. And it has to be, what we add would have to be an independent clause. And last but not least, my favorite ice cream is cookie dough. My brother's favorite ice cream is chocolate chip. This is what kind of air? Comma splice, absolutely. So comma splice, we'll be fancy and put a semicolon. These sentences are related, so we can do that. So yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about for punctuation. Does anybody have any questions regarding what we just talked about before we take our first break? All right, so let's take a break. A little more than 10 minutes. Let's just be back here at 1:20 Eastern Time. Okay, and we'll continue. All right, so I'll see you guys in just a little bit. All right, guys, welcome back. Let's go ahead and we will start the, let me get rid of lesson 5. Let's get rid of that. And let's do lesson 6. So we're going to be on a math lesson now. It's going to kind of alternate like that for the rest of these lessons. Okay, lesson 6. All right, so for math last time we talked about those 5 main strategies: substitute abstracts for tangibles, substitute abstracts in the problem, ditch the tech, just get started, draw a diagram. Then we talked about acing lines. No, that's what we're doing now. Ace equations, ace expressions, ace exponents. We did ace data analysis, and probably one other thing. But that's beside the point. We will start now with acing graphs. So let's talk about graphs. Graphs. What should we know about graphs? We should know how to find the slope of a graph, which is given by y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, or y1 minus y2 over x1 minus x2. Doesn't matter which order, you will get the same exact answer. We should know that this means that our slope, which we often call m, is your change in y over change in x. So if we have a steep slope, that means we're changing in y faster than we're changing in x. If we have a flat slope, it means we're changing in x faster than we're changing in y. And we like slope-intercept form. Slope-intercept forms gives us everything we need to be able to graph something, because it gives us a starting point, right? It gives us a point along the y-axis to start at, and then it gives us directions to the next point. It says go 2 up and 2 over. So that's all we need to know to be able to graph a line, is the starting point plus directions to the next point. So we should know parallel slopes have equal slopes. Perpendicular slopes have opposite reciprocal slopes. So any line for any c, so this is going to be fancy math notation, you don't need to know this, but this is a way to say for any c in 0 to infinity, we're going to have a parallel slope, right? Y equals 1/2 x plus 10. Y equals 1/2 x minus 11. Y equals 1/2 x plus infinity. They will all have parallel slopes to any other line with y equals 1/2 x. Okay. Perpendicular slopes form 90 degrees. To find a perpendicular slope, we do an opposite reciprocal. Okay. So that same line, if I had a line equals y equals 1/2 x, if I want to find the perpendicular slope, I would flip the fraction and change the sign. So if I flip this fraction, I'm going to get 2. If I change the sign, I'm going to get -2. So opposite reciprocal means flipping the fraction and changing the sign. Okay. So perpendicular slopes form 90-degree angles. All right. Shifts. The slope of a graph does not change with shifts. True. If I shift it up or down, it's not going to change it. The magnitude of a slope is equivalent to its steepness. So magnitude is something you should think of as being taking like the absolute value of something. So basically what we're saying is that a slope with a, let's say we have a line with a slope of -10 and a line with a slope of 9. This slope has a greater magnitude, okay? Because to find magnitude, we take the absolute value of the slope, okay? So magnitude of a slope is equivalent to its steepness. For example, a slope of 2 has a greater magnitude than a slope of 1/2. Similarly, a slope of -2 has a greater magnitude than a slope of -1/2. So negatives don't matter when we think about the slope, magnitude. They matter when we talk about slope. Intercepts. There's a lot of basic stuff on here. It's just the way we roll. Say this is our axis. This is my x-axis. And this is my y-axis. Pretty profound stuff, huh? I intersect the x-axis whenever y equals 0. So my x-intercepts occur when y equals 0, which is sometimes a little counterintuitive, but if I haven't gone up or down, I'm along the x-axis, okay? Y-intercept is whenever x equals 0, right? So we haven't gone left or right. So here would be our y-int, and here in this case we'd have 2 x-intercepts. Let's see, anything else there too important? Asymptotes. I don't think I've seen asymptotes tested too much. A line that a curve approaches but does not touch. So this one is kind of confusing because the bold line is not the origin. It's this line that's the origin. And then our asymptotes are the bold lines. So basically, if I have a function, that looks something like this, then I would say that I had an asymptote at, this might be the line, you know, y equals 2. So if I asked for the domain here, and actually we might also have an asymptote right here. So the domain in this case would be, you know, I'm not at x equals 0. I never touch x equals 0. So our domain would have to be x greater than 0. And our range, what are our possible y values? It's going to be y has to be greater than 2, right? Because we're never going to be less than y equals 2, and we're never going to be less than or equal to 0. So asymptotes are just imaginary lines that you can't touch. I don't see this show up too much either, but just a refresher on what even and odd functions mean. Even functions are symmetric about the x-axis. And by definition, it means f of negative x equals f of x, right? So basically, if I picked an x, let's pick x equals 2, I would get f of negative 2 is equal to f of 2 when they're even, right? Because f of negative 2 is 2, f of 2 is 2. This is correct. This has to be true for all x. We just picked one to demonstrate, but that would have to be true for all x for it to be truly even. To be odd means you're symmetric about the origin, so it's kind of funky. But if you think about what sine ends up looking like, it's going to look like this. So basically we're symmetric about the origin because this reflects down to this. But it's weird because your origin goes both ways. This reflects up to this, and so forth. So odd functions have the definition f of negative x has to equal negative f of x. No need to talk about that. Reflections, we should know quadrant numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. Right here, x and y are both positive. Here, x is negative, but y is positive. Here, x and y are both negative. And here, x is positive, but y is negative. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's look at this example. Suppose that dogs were plotted on the x-axis and cats on the y-axis. Okay, so we have this chart, dogs, cats. And I want to plot dogs versus cats. So we're basically saying we have some sort of graph where on the x-axis we would have dogs. On the y-axis we have cats. And we want to know how many data points would be above the line y equals x. Well, what does line y equals x represent? It represents the point where cats equals dogs, right? So if I want to know how many points are above this line, points above this line occur when we have more cats than dogs, right? If I want to pick an extreme example, pick over here where we have like 1 dog and 50 cats. So how many times do we have more cats than dogs? Not here, here, not here, here. So if I were making a scatter plot, there would be 2 points above this line. That's basically what we're saying. Graph types, we have a parabola, we have square root, nothing too mind-boggling. Standard form of a quadratic, we should know this, but we should also know vertex form. Okay? That's one thing you should definitely know. Okay, so vertex form is basically, it gives you the, it's probably going to be on the next slide, I forget. The vertex form basically gives you the point of your vertex is at HK. So that's pretty cool. Yep, it was on the next slide, of course. So if I don't have it in vertex form, so vertex form, you'll want to use this whenever a question says like, how could I write this equation such that the vertex shows up as coefficients in the problem, something like that. Then you want to write it in vertex form. Here, if I want to find a vertex, you guys might remember that you can find a vertex. Remember, your vertex is either your maximum or your minimum point, depending. The x value is at -b over 2a. And then your y value is going to be what you get when you plug this back in, right? So you would write the vertex as being -b over 2a, f of -b over 2a. That would give you your vertex. If you have it in standard form, I need to find it. How to find the vertex given the zero. So here's just a fun trick. We should know that parabolas are symmetric. So basically, a parabola is symmetric about its vertex. So that means if I drew a line through the vertex, that means I could fold, right? This is a reflection of one another. Looks bad. But this should be equidistant from this as this, right? So we can actually use this to our advantage because if I know where the 2 zeros are, I can tell you that the 2 zeros are equidistant from the vertex, from the x value of the vertex, right? Because these are my x values I can find. The x value of my vertex if I know where my 2 zeros are. Because let's say this is at -1 and this is at 10, then I would know that what comes between -1 and 10? Well, between -1 and 10, there's 11 spaces. 11 divided by 2 is 5.5. So I would know then that my vertex would have to be at 5.5. So that's just a fast way, just a way you may not have thought of before, of finding vertex if you have it graphed, because the vertex has to come directly between your 2 zeros. It also has to come directly between any 2 points at any given y value. But the y value that's easiest to do this with is when y equals 0. So that's why we use this. So yeah, so let's say for instance, I have this formula and I want to find the vertex. What I could do is I can multiply this out. I could FOIL. I could do all that and then do what I just said, which was find negative b over 2a and then plug in that. Or I could say the zeros for this are, if I think about it, they're going to be at 4 and at negative 6. So that's a distance of 10. So I know the vertex has to come directly in between. So it must be 5 away from either of these. So it must be at negative 1. So then I would figure out that my vertex x value is at negative 1. If I want to find out what the y value is, I would just plug that back in. And I would end up getting y equals negative 50. Okay. So just a little trick. Thinking about problems a little bit differently than we may have previously. Root equations. You should also be familiar with how square root graphs look. The green line in the above image is a good example. It is the graph to the following equation. Y equals the square root of x. The good thing is if you have your calculator and you forget what something looks like, you should graph it. If you don't know how to use the graphing capabilities on your calculator, it's something I think is really powerful and useful. There's plenty of YouTube videos you can watch about such things. And that's something I might recommend actually. You should be familiar with graphs that show exponential growth. So if you're, remember what exponential growth means. It means you're increasing at an increasing rate. So right, not only are you getting bigger, you're getting bigger by more each time, right? So the first time maybe between 0 and 1, we got bigger by 1. But between 1 and 2, we got bigger by 2. And between 2 and 3, we got bigger by 1, 2, 3, 4. So each time, I'm getting bigger by more than I did before. When we're linear, we get bigger by the same amount every time. Got bigger by 1, got bigger by 1, got bigger by 1, got bigger by 1, got bigger by 1. Intersections, we already talked about this. When two graphs intersect, that's a solution to the system of equations, right? Because yesterday we said there's 3 ways to solve a system of equations. One is graphing, one is substitution, and the other is elimination. So this is a very common type of question. Not the, never mind. I'll show you after. Here it says the zeros of a function represent the x values at which a graph's y value is 0. Visually, zeros are when a graph crosses the x-axis. True. The below graph has 3 distinct zeros. Okay, beautiful. One question that they sometimes ask is they ask you for, they'll say, let's say y equals k. For what k does y, well, I'll call this like y2, we call this y1. Does y1 and y2 have 3 solutions? And basically, if y equals to something is some sort of horizontal line. So at y equals 2, we'd have 3 solutions. At y equals 4, I'd have 1 solution. At y equals -3, I'd have 2 solutions. At y equals -5, I'd have 1 solution. So you can kind of see, this is a question that gets kind of asked frequently. So you always need to remember that what do solutions mean? It means intersection points. So if we go here and I say, a system of 3 equations and graphs and xy plane are shown in the figure above. How many solutions does this system have? I'll let you guys think about that for a second. My boyfriend's hiding in the bushes outside, acting like Sean Spicer. All right, Logan, 1. 1 would be correct because that's the only place where all my graphs converge, right? Now there's several points here where, you know, the circle has 1, 2 solutions with the line. And the parabola has 1, 2, 3, 4 solutions with the circle. But how many solutions do we have where they all intersect? Just one. All right. Then we have, what is the vertex of the parabola? So you could do this several ways. We could put this in vertex form. We could FOIL this and do the negative b over 2a. Or we could use the trick we were just talking about, where we find where the zeros are. So I can tell that the zeros of this guy are going to be at x equals -3 and at x equals -1. What comes between -3 and -1? -2. There's only one answer choice, where -2 is an option. And see how much quicker that was to do this particular problem. So remember, this test isn't all about showing that you're good at math or you're able to do stuff. It's about doing stuff efficiently and quickly and without making errors. And sometimes when you do something in a much, you know, I had a lot less room for error here than if I had FOILed it out, done negative b over 2a, and plugged that back in, yada, yada, yada. Okay. So we want to minimize error. All right, any questions so far on that? Because we're going to be moving on to acing center of data. And yes, I'm using a chopstick to stir my tea, if you're wondering what it is. Okay. A center of data. So to find the mean of a set of numbers, add all the numbers together and divide by the number of items in the set. It's pretty straightforward, right? So if I want to find the mean of 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, and 5, it's going to be 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 4 plus 5, divided by 6, 19 over 6. I want to find the median. Arrange all the numbers from smallest to largest and select the middle value. Now, if you have an odd number of things, you're going to have a true median. If you have an even number of things, you'll have not a true median. Okay. So for instance, if I have 1, 7, 10, 11, and I want to find the mean of this, I would take the average of the middle two. But if I have 1, 7, 10, 11, 37, then I have one true mean, right? So here I would take the average of 7 and 10. Here my median, sorry, not mean, my median would be just 10. Sometimes you'll need to generalize this to big things. So for instance, I always make these small examples to remind myself what it looks like. But what if I had 300 objects and I wanted to find my median object? And I'd be like, well, where does my median occur, right? So I kind of refer to these, you know, these are the values, but I could call this, you know, position 1, position 2, position 3, position 4. I call this position 1, position 2, position 3, position 4, position 5. And the reason I'm showing you guys this is because I think it helps whenever you have to think about something that you can't list all the numbers out, it'll help you think about where the median happens. So if I have 300 things, it'll be the 2 items that I need to take are the middle 2 items. And how do I find that? Well, I'm going to do 300 divided by 2, and I'll find that I need the 150th item as well as the next item. So if I have a list of 300 things, I would find the average of the 150th and the 151st item to find the median. However, let's say I had 301 things, if I had an odd number of things. What I would do then is I would divide 301 divided by 2. I would get 150.5, and I would round that up. And that's what this symbol means. It means to take the ceiling. So the median term, whenever you have an odd number of objects, is the ceiling of the number of objects you have divided by 2. Okay, so 155 divided 150.5 rounds up to 151. So in this case, my 151st item are that. So Eleanor, we're about to do a problem where you'll see how we do this. So good question, because that means you understand that 150 is not the value, it is the place. So we'll do an example here. So find the median number of dogs owned by students at Clark High School and Coronado High School. So basically, I know that we have a total of 3,001 samples, okay? So we have an odd number of things. So like I just said, we're going to do 3,001 divided by 2. That's going to be 1,500.5, and we're going to round that up. So I know I'm looking for the 1,501st student, right? Which is what it says right here. So what we can do is we can think of this graph here as, instead of being in a table, we could think of it as just a list. So basically, if I thought of this as a list, we would have how many zeros? I would have 0, 400 plus 390 times. So that would be 790 times. Is the 1,501st element going to fall in the zeros then? No, because we haven't gotten there yet. Okay, then we are going to have ones. How many ones am I going to have? I'm going to have 320 plus 380. So that's going to be 700. So by the time I get to the end of the ones, how many items will I have listed? I will have listed 1,490, right? So we're still not to the 1,501st student. So then we'll list the twos. And at this point, it should be somewhat obvious that the 1,501st student is going to fall somewhere in here. So there'll be 700 students in here. So by the time I get to the end of the twos, we're going to be at 2,190 students. So the last one here will be 2,190. But the first one was 1,490. So, you know, 1,501 comes between 1,490 and 2,190. So I would know that 2 is the answer. So this is a little confusing, but I think it's useful to always write out these graphically, not graphically, the data displayed in tables as if it were a list, because when we talk about median, we talk about having an ordered list, right? So when we're talking about a median here, we're talking about some sort of ordering. Does that make sense? Questions, specific questions about that? All right, mode's a little easier. Mode just means most. So in this set of data, the mode would be 4, because we have 4 more than we have any other number. Range is the distance between my largest and my smallest number. So if we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, the distance between 5 and 1 is just 4. Standard deviation, this is a topic that many students haven't learned before, but you don't need to know how to calculate it, you just need to understand the concept. So I'm going to explain to you the concept of standard deviation by drawing you 2 beautiful graphs. Okay. Let's say I have a bunch of data that looks like this. If I found the average of all these points, I added the x values together, took the average, added the y values together, took the average, I would get that my average point was about this green spot, right? Now let's say over here that I have data that looks like this. If I took the average of all of those points, I would get something around here, right? So what standard deviation does is it measures the average distance between every point and the mean of all the points. So this data, because it's clustered around one spot, has a relatively small standard deviation, whereas this has a relatively large standard deviation, okay? Because although this is the average, none of the points are close to the average, right? Here, this is the average, and most of the points are pretty close to the average, okay? So this is relatively small, this is relatively large, and that's what you'll be asked to do on the test. You'll be asked to differentiate between a relatively small or a relatively large standard deviation. So, in this case, if I look at set A and set B here, which of these do you guys think would have a larger standard deviation? B, absolutely, because the points in B are all over the place, whereas in set A, we're clustered very closely together. So set A has a relatively small standard deviation compared to set B. Okay, sum of means. So if there's something that says, what is the last value in a set of 10 numbers that has an average of 35 and the other 9 numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? This is the same kind of question like when they ask, Sarah has taken 3 of her 4 math tests. Her scores so far are 80, 87, and 92. What does Sarah need on her last test to get an at least an 90 in the class? So to set something up like this, it means we know what we want our average to be, and when I add together the elements, we have some unknown, we'll call it x, that when we divide this all by 4, we want to get 90, right? So if I want to solve for what x would be in this case, I would do 360 minus 80 minus 87 minus 92, and I would get, she would need 101. It doesn't look like she's going to get an A in the class. Okay, so lots of these types of problems, always something kind of like this, solving for x here, such that this has to be true. So I got 101 by, if I wrote out the steps, we're solving for x, right? So I would do, well, I could add these up already, sometimes it's faster. So if I say 80 plus 87 plus 92. So this is really going to be 259 plus x equals, and I multiplied that 4 over to the side, so equals 360. So to solve for x, I would subtract 259 from both sides. And that's how I got x equals 101. So this is just an algebra problem. Just solve for x. You can always set up these types of problems this way. Yes, of course. Outliers. And a symmetrical distribution of data. So symmetrical distribution just means that it's distributed symmetrically about like your mean. So if this is my mean, symmetric data looks like this. Except for pretend that it's actually symmetric. Okay, so when it says asymmetrical distribution, which in statistics we call a normal distribution, the mean is equal to the median, which makes sense if I look at this, right? If this is my mean, the number that comes in the middle will also be the mean, so the mean equals the median. However, if there are outliers, which are values that are significantly smaller or larger than the rest of the data, the mean will be pulled in the direction of the outliers, right? So let's say, for instance, that I have a set where the mean car value is 50,000 and the median car value is 30,000. So the median car value is much smaller than the mean. There's likely an outlier that is more expensive than the rest of the cars, right? So here, if I took the average, I would get 50,000, but that's not really representative of the actual cost of most of these cars, right? It's not the actual cost of any of the cars. So that's why sometimes median is a more meaningful number, because it gives you a better idea of what most things look like. So you would say that this data was skewed to the right. It's skewed to the right because the mean has been pulled upwards by this large outlier on the right. On the other hand, if the mean car value is 30,000 and the median car value is 50,000, then you know there must be something skewing it to the left. So you probably have some cheap cars, or some cars that aren't worth anything, that skews the data, right? So that's what outliers do. They can affect your data, make it not representative of most things in the set. That's why in data sets you often remove outliers. Margin of error. Margin of error describes how far off the sample mean is from the true mean of the population. So let me explain this to you in real terms. Let's say that I wanted to find the average height of people in my class. And if I wanted to find the true mean, I would measure everybody's height, right? Get a mean. That would be the true mean. A sample mean would mean if I didn't measure everybody in the class, but I measured 30% of the class. That would be a sample mean. Margin of error is the difference between the true mean and the sample mean. So obviously, as my sample gets larger, it's going to approach the true mean of the population, right? So that's what margin of error is. It's kind of a weird measure, because I mean, if you know the true mean, then you don't really need the sample mean. But you should know that a larger standard deviation increases the margin of error of the average. So here, which of the following two sets has a larger margin of error? It would be set B. And it makes sense, right? Because in B, it's going to really matter, if I was only taking a sample. What if I took a sample that was only these three things, right? Then it's going to be nowhere representative of the rest of the set. But here, even if I took a sample of 4, 4, 5, I wouldn't be that off from the true mean of the set, okay? So that's the idea here. If you have a larger standard deviation, you're probably going to have a larger margin of error. You don't need to do that. Adding means. So to find the mean of two sets of data that each have their own, to find the mean of two sets of data that each have their own respective means, we need to add together all the numbers and divide by the total number of units in that set. So if I say the mean number of hours of sleep for 10 boys is 8 hours, that means that the boys slept a total of 80 hours. Right? Because the way I would write this out is boy 1 plus boy 2 plus ... plus boy 10. So we get 10. If I divide that by 10, I'm going to get 8. So the sum of B1 plus B2 plus ... B10 is going to equal 80 hours. Same thing for girls. If mean for 20 girls is 7, then the total number of hours that they slept had to be 140 hours. And if I want to find the total mean of the group, what I could do is 220 total hours slept divided by 30 people. And you'll see that this is much closer to the average for the girls, which makes sense because there were more girls. Okay. So if you have two means and you want to find the average of those means, then you need to find the totals, in this case, total hours slept for boys, total hours slept for girls, add those together, and divide by the total number of people you have. Because really what this is is I get B1 plus B2 plus dot 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 plus B10 divided by 10 equals 8. So B1 plus B2 plus B10 equals 80. I get G1 plus dot 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 G20 is going to be equal to 140. So if I want to figure out boy 1 plus boy 2 plus dot 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 boy 10 plus G1 plus dot 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 G20, if I want to find the average of this, that's really just going to be 80 plus 140, and then we divide by the total number we have. So that's why it works. Okay. So, a farmer randomly selected 40 ducks on the farm and measured their weight. The mean weight in the sample was 24 pounds, and the margin of error was 2.8 pounds. The farmer intends to replicate the survey and will attempt to get a smaller margin of error. Which of the following samples will most likely result in a smaller margin of error for the estimated mean weight of the ducks? So yes, we want to randomly select ducks, but we're already selecting 40. So we're going to get better sample size if we select more ducks. If we select farm animals, that's not going to be very useful. So yeah, the larger your sample size, usually the better. You guys may have remembered yesterday I said that 30 was usually sufficient for a sample size, but always the more you have is better. And then in the class, the mean height of boys is 173 and the mean height of girls is 165. Which of the following must be true about the mean height of all the students? Yeah, it's D. Because we don't know how many boys and how many girls we have, right? If I had 100 boys and 1 girl, then we're going to be really close to 173. If I had 100 girls and 1 boy, we'd be really close to 165. But it doesn't tell us the distribution here, so all I know is that the mean will have to come somewhere in the middle. Okay. So we have D. All right. ACE unit conversions and rates. You must be able to convert from one unit of time to another. So I think this will be best done through example problems. If you've taken physics or chemistry, then you've done unit conversions most likely. So stoichiometry, right? Figuring out how many moles you have of a certain element or whatever. We can do the same sort of stuff with sorts of conversions. So just think, okay, how many yards will a centipede travel in one day if it moves at a rate of 1 inch per 10 seconds? So I think what's always useful to do is to write out what units you want in the end. So I want to get yards per day, right? And I'm starting with 1 inch per 10 seconds, right? So I'll show you. If I start with 1 inch per 10 seconds, and I want yards per day. First thing I should decide if I want to go in time or in measurement first. So I'll go with time first. Let's find out how many inches we go in a day. Okay. Well, there's 10 seconds and 1 inch in 10 seconds, but I know there's 60 seconds in 1 minute. And I know that there's 60 minutes in 1 hour. And I know there's 24 hours in 1 day. So what you do with unit conversion is my seconds will cancel with seconds, my minutes will cancel with minutes, my hours will cancel with hours. And what I'm going to be left with here when I multiply this out, when I do 1 times 60 times 24 divided by 10, I'm going to get that we go 8640 inches per day. So we're in days, but now I want to be in yards. So I know that there's 36 inches in 1 yard. And I decide what fraction I want to multiply by what will cancel inches, right? So if I do that, divided by 36, I will get 240 yards. So this guy can go 2.4 football fields in a day. That's pretty crazy. We got the right answer. So unit conversions are cool. We'll do a couple more examples. Say John rides his bike at an average of 4 meters per second. So 4 meters per second. Rides 12 hours a day. How many days does he need to pass 920 miles? So ultimately, all I want is days. Okay, so days is what we're working towards. So we have to keep that in mind. So maybe the first thing that would be useful for me to figure out would be to figure out how many meters I go per day, right? So if I go 4 meters per second, and once again, it's very similar, there's 60 seconds and 1 minute, and you can skip this and just say, you know, there's 3,600 seconds in an hour or something if you want. But I'm just doing it step by step. 60 minutes in 1 hour, 24 hours in 1 day. But he doesn't ride for 24 hours a day. He rides for 12 hours a day. So that's when we'll put 12 hours per day. Okay. So now you can see my minutes. Seconds cancel, minutes cancel, hours cancel. And I'm going to be in how many meters I go every day. So if I do 4 times 60 times 60 times 12, oops. I'm going to get that he goes 172,800 meters per day. Okay. So how many days does he need to pass 920 miles? So I know I need to be in miles because right now I'm in meters. So I know that there are 1,000 meters in 1 kilometer. And I know from this that there is 1.6 kilometers in 1 mile. So now we can see I'm going to be in miles per day. How many miles per day I can go in? So 1,272,800 divided by 1,000 will give me kilometers per day. Divided by 1.6 will give me miles per day. So from this, I get he can go 108 miles per day. Ultimately, we just want to get in the unit of days. So we go 108 miles per day. How many days does it take us to go 920 miles? So what I can do is just divide 920 miles divided by, or think of it like this, per day over 108. If you just want to think about miles, you want to just think about units. But you could probably think about that without using units. And I would get that we would need 8.5 days. We probably need to round up in this situation. So I'd say 9, because it will take me half of the 9th day to ride that long. So we would need 9 total days. So unit conversions. We'll do one more example, then we'll take our break. Sally is about to leave to work in 15 minutes. But first she needs to download 10 files of 62 megabytes each onto her memory stick. Download internet connection is 3.5 megabits per second. If 1 megabit equals 0.125 megabytes, what is the maximum number of files Sally can download in 15 minutes? So the first thing I do for this problem is, because I'll get confused, I'm going to write megabits as a little b. I'm going to write bytes as a big B, so I don't have to write it every time. But let's figure out, first it seems like it'd be useful to know how many megabytes bytes we can download in 15 minutes, right? So let's start with there. I know we can do 3.5 megabits per second. 3.5 megabits is how many megabytes? Well, I know that 1 megabit is equal to 0.125 megabytes. So now I'm in megabytes per second. But I want to figure out per minute, so I can figure out how many I can do in 15 minutes, right? So seconds, I'm going to do 60 seconds in 1 minute. So now I'm in megabytes per minute, and then let's just multiply by 15 minutes, and then I'm just going to be in megabytes, right? So I'll do 3.5 times 0.125 times 60 times 15. So I got that we can do 393.75 megabytes in 15 minutes. And we know that each of these files is 62 megabytes. So how many files could we download? Okay, so we can do this many bytes, and one file has 62 megabytes. So how many total files could we download? It is going to be that divided by 62. I'm going to get 6.35. In this case, we should round down, right? Because I can't load the entire 7th file. I can load 35% of the 7th file. So, oh, did I forget to divide by 8 somewhere? So this wasn't an 8. This was I was crossing out the S because it crossed out with seconds, if that's what you were looking at. No, that's totally fine. I actually looked at it twice and I was like, oh yeah, that's just an S. So yeah, 3.5 megabits per second. And the seconds will cancel over here. Yeah. So go to 6. But no, please feel free to point out I do mess up more than you might think. Or maybe you think that I am messing up a lot. Okay, so we're getting done with this. Let's go ahead and take our break. I'll let you guys ponder about what we just did. Let's meet back here at let's see, at 2:25 Eastern time. All right, see you guys in just a moment. right, guys. Let's go ahead, finish up this lesson. We'll start the next lesson, then we'll have lunch and not too long. All right, so unit conversion. Done with that. Percent change. Percent change is something that shows up often enough. To calculate a percent change is basically saying, you know, if I used to make, or I don't know why I'm saying, let's write this as like a real problem. Johnny makes $15 per hour. If he gets a raise and is now making $20 an hour, $20 per hour, by what percent did his salary change? So this is a problem where you would use percent change. And I would say the absolute value of 20 minus 15, and you should always use these absolute values divided by 15. So I would get 20 minus 15 is 5. 5 over 15 is 33%. So he's making 33% more. He got a 33% raise. Okay, but one thing that we should notice is if this changed, and I said Johnny makes $20 per hour, if he gets a unraise and is now making 15 per hour, by what percentage did his salary change? We get a different answer, okay? So he's making 33% more if he goes from 15 to 20. I can still do this, I could do this, but now I'm going to be dividing by 20. Okay. So now I'm going to get 5 over 20. Yeah, 5 over 20, which is not going to be 30%. He's going to be making a 25% decrease, right? So here, if I went from 20 to 15, that's a 25% decrease. If I go from 15 to 20, that's a 33% increase. So there is a difference depending on which way you go. So for percent change, you should remember it's like your original value minus your new value all over the original value. And that's percent change. Okay. We don't need to do this. Linear versus exponential growth we already talked about, right? We can tell something is exponentially growing if we're increasing at an increasing rate. Linear growth, you're increasing at a constant rate. So here at time 0, we are at 10. At time 1, we're at 20. So we added 10. Between years 1 and 2, we changed by 10. Between years 2 and 3, we changed by 10. So cool. This is constant, this is linear. Exponential growth, if I start with 10, and the next year I increase by 90, and the next year I increase by 900, and the next year I increase by 9,000. This is exponential growth because each year we're increasing by more than we did the year before. Don't need to know that. Unknown proportions. This is a kind of a typical type of question you might see. Let's say there are 12 dogs and 8 cats. 5 more cats are added to the group. How many dogs must be added so that 4/5 of the total number of animals in the study are dogs? So this is a type of question that's pretty common. So basically, we know we have 12 cats. and we have, no, 12 dogs, sorry. And 13 cats, right? So the total number of dogs and cats I have is 25. And I want to know how I can make dogs, how many dogs I need to add such that the total number of dogs I have over the total number of animals I have is 4/5. So the thing that tricks people here is that, we start with 12. So I know that 12 plus something over the total number is going to equal 4/5. That's what lots of people would write. They're like, we just need to figure out what x is. But the thing is, when I add to the number of dogs, I also change the number of total animals we have. So that's how you get 12 plus x over 25 plus x equals 4/5. So I need to figure out how many dogs I need to add, but also if I'm adding dogs, I'm changing the total number of animals. So this is a common type of problem. Might be with marbles, might be with whatever. And this part here is always weird. They don't just say you have 13 cats. They're like, you have 8 cats, and then you add 5 cats. So what they're really trying to say is you have 13 cats. But they're just trying to make it confusing. Okay, we don't need that. We don't need these. Last thing we'll talk about are lines and angles. Parallel lines never intersect. We already talked about this. We're coming full circle. So the slopes of parallel lines are equal. Perpendicular lines, they have opposite reciprocal slopes, and they make 90-degree angles. Complementary angles form 90 degrees. So if I do this plus this, I'm going to make a 90-degree angle. Supplementary angles form 180 degrees, and vertical angles are equal to one another. Okay. So complementary 90, supplementary 180, vertical angles are equal to one another. Transversal to parallel lines, these are corresponding angles, right? So we have if we have 2 parallel lines, so we would assume these 2 lines are parallel. That means if a line comes and cuts through, that makes sense then that you would form the same angle here as you would form here. But since this angle is vertical of this angle, these 2 angles are the same, and these 2 angles are the same. Okay, so these are corresponding angles. So here it says in the figure above, ABC is congruent to ABD. So it's saying this, and this small triangle is congruent to or similar to this big triangle. Which of the following must be true? So with some of these, you can even kind of create boss solutions. What I would know is that if 2 triangles are the same, they have to have 3 of the same angles, right? For them to be similar, I have to have 3 of the same angles. So I know both of these triangles will have this angle be the same, but I need this angle to be equal to this angle, and I need this angle to be equal to this angle. And the only way that's going to be true is if this line is parallel to this line, right? So it's going to be if BC is parallel with DE, right? Because that's going to correspond back to this. If I have this transversal stuff, then this angle will be equal to this angle, for instance. All right, so we kind of buzzed through that. Now I'm going to open the next lesson. Any residual questions from what we just talked about? All right, so we're on lesson 7 now. We're cruising. We're only going through 9 lessons. So start with lesson 7, which is capitalize on passage type. This is for reading. So last time with reading, we talked about faking interest, try to sympathize, not sympathize, but give the narrator a personality. attack answer choices, which is one of my favorites, attack answer choices and avoid justification. Next, we're going to talk about capitalizing on passage type. So I want you guys, when you're practicing with the reading section, to be trying to pay attention to the passages that you usually do well on and the passages you usually don't do so well on. Okay? So many people will think that the first passage is the hardest, for instance. And what I would recommend is then that you save that passage for last. Okay? So literature is always the first passage. It's usually the hardest for most people. Sometimes people dislike the science passages more. It really depends on the person. But capitalizing on passage type means you could know your strengths and weaknesses. And one thing I say is if you know weakness is the first passage, then don't start with it. Because you know what happens if you start with your weakness is you lose confidence, you get frustrated, you feel the time pressure even more because you're starting with something difficult before you've answered anything else and you have everything else in the back of your mind. So you can change up the order in which you do the passages. If you have trouble with timing, see if this works. Also, the advantage to this is if you do this and you run out of time, at least you'll be guessing on questions at the end on passages that you usually do poorly on anyway, so it doesn't matter so much. So that's my advice for passage type. You should know there's historical science, social studies, literature, always. One thing I can say about another thing I was going to say is that there's always the one comparative passage, and I want to make sure that you guys are using or thinking about or reading it the right way, which is for the comparative passage. Your first step is going to be read passage A. Your second step is going to be answer questions related to passage A. Next will be to read passage B, and then you're going to answer questions related to passage B. And then last, you're going to answer questions relating to both A and B. All right, so that's the way for the comparative passage type that you should be breaking it up. You should read passage A, answer those questions. Read passage B, answer those questions, then answer the questions that talk about both. Right. Take everything at face value. So, Elizabeth, yeah, so there usually are line-cited questions on the comparative passage, so you would read passage A using the chunk approach, then you would read passage B with a chunk approach. So yeah, it's like an additional chunking is to break up those passages entirely, but you would still use the chunk approach as there still probably are line-cited questions. Okay. Take everything at face value. I told you this would be showing up again and again. The manner in which we speak, text, and tweet every day becomes detrimental to SAT reading scores. When we talk to friends, we don't require them to speak perfectly. Not only do we not require them to have perfect grammar, but we don't require them to literally mean everything they say. I think I already used this example, but if an author says that he has no friends, then that means the author really has no friends. So, of course, if your friend tells you that he or she has no friends, then you know that isn't true because you're probably their friend. Don't cut the reading section any slack. If Martha says she rides her bike every day, that means she rides it 365 days a year without ever taking a day off, even if she has pneumonia. Okay? So this will help you focus when you're trying to sift through answer choices and when you're attacking them. When you're attacking answer choices and saying, you're trying to figure out what's wrong with one of these, one of the questions you can ask yourself is, if I take this at face value, does this still make sense? Don't say the text could be. So could be, this phrase indicates that you're justifying answer choices. Could be means that you're questioning your own comprehension. If you say, well, maybe the author could be trying to say this, or this could be the answer, then you have the wrong mindset. So this is just kind of like the canary in the coal mine to let you know that you are thinking about this incorrectly. So not only will you start to confuse yourself, but placing answer choices that are wrong 75% of the time is a surefire way to decrease your reading score. So you do not want to be saying could be. If you find yourself saying could be, then you're thinking about the passage wrong. So basically, this is just a tangible way for you to apply some of the strategies we already talked about, right? So if you find yourself, it could be step back and start attacking answer choices. Ask, does the text mention? So the best question you should ask yourself, instead of saying could be, you should say, well, does the text mention this? If the answer is yes, then the answer choice is likely correct. If it's no, then you're likely coming up with an assumption that cannot be backed up by the passage. So constantly asking this question is a tangible way to challenge answer choices so that you avoid justification. All right, and then we'll talk a little bit about interpreting data. We haven't talked about this too much, but you get something on the test called a cross-sectional score. So basically on the reading, the writing, and the math, there are questions that are related to interpreting data. And they'll call that your cross-sectional science score. I believe that's what it's called. So that's why you will get questions like this on all the sections, and the way your ability to answer them will affect your cross-sectional science score. I don't know if anybody actually cares about your cross-sectional science score, but yeah. Okay. So a new question type for the SAT writing, SAT math, and SAT reading section is the interpretation of charts, graphs, etc. On SAT reading, the author will likely make a statement about the graphically displayed data. Then you will have to determine whether the author's assertion about the chart is beyond the scope of the graphic. Essentially, the SAT reading section may make an assumption that is not supported by the data shown in the chart. In order to tackle these questions, we need a standardized method to approach data interpretation. For each of the most common graphically displayed data formats, we should have a standardized approach so that we are better able to make conclusions about the graph, chart, table, etc. Basically, always approach data the same. Don't try to skip any part because you're rushing. First thing you always want to do is read title. Okay, so in this case, I would read Ukraine, percentage of individuals using the internet. Then I would look at the x-axis and I would say year, y-axis, percent. I would interpret one bar and say in 2012, it looks like about 35% of people in Ukraine used the internet. Voila. For a chart like this, you may instead want to just interpret the trend, but you still want to read all the axes titles. So US women weight versus height. Height on the x-axis, weight on the y-axis. The trend is as height goes up, weight goes up. So there's a direct correlation. Pie chart. Read the title and interpret a slice. Annual associate's degrees awarded by Field at Columbus State Community College in Columbus, Ohio. You know, 16% of their degrees are in business. So that's all. We have a good understanding of what this is going to represent now, and if I need anything more specific, I can get there. And same thing for this chart. So basically read the titles, read the column headers and the row headers in the title. So resources organizations provide to external executives. We have the number of organizations that provide the resource, number that say it's effective, And the resources themselves are mentoring, orientation, customized assimilation plans, executive coaching, pre-employment. So I could interpret one row here and say the number of organizations that provide pre-employment is 27%, and only 8% of those say it's effective. Okay, so that was it for that reading lesson. It went really fast. I told you that the lessons today were going to go faster than yesterday. So basically we learned capitalize on passage type, have a standardized way to approach data, ask does the text submission, don't say the text could be, and take everything at face value. Modify appropriately. We'll start with the writing. This is expert strategy 11. Modifiers are phrases that describe nouns. Modifiers are separated from a sentence using one or more commas. We've already discussed one modifier, which is a non-essential appositive. We're going to go through some examples so you can see a beginning modifier, a middle modifier, and an end modifier. But yeah, appositives are separated from the sentence using 2 commas or 2 dashes. You guys might remember that. We talked about that's one way we can use the dash. But most modifiers have only 1 comma and often start and end sentences. So in order to modify appropriately, you must place the correct noun next to the modifier. These errors are hard to spot, just like transition errors. They're not going to sound necessarily wrong to us. But they will be wrong. And to modify appropriately, it takes 2 steps. We have to determine what the noun is that we're modifying, and determine if the noun is next to the comma of the modifier. So we'll look at a couple examples. So 3 types of modifiers. If it's a middle modifier, another word for that is an appositive. A beginning modifier, if I say something like, having hiked for 3 miles, the travelers were very tired. Who has hiked for 3 miles? The travelers. But if I said instead, the travelers were very tired, comma, having hiked for 3 miles, the sentence would technically be not correct, because I need the travelers to be next to having hiked for 3 miles because they're the ones that have hiked for 3 miles. Okay. Joe Polizzi, an internet marketing guru, is the foremost expert on creating content to increase traffic to your website. In modifiers, perhaps the most famous character in Mad Men is Don Draper, a successful New York advertising executive. So who is a successful New York advertising executive? Don Draper. Okay. And notice that all these modifiers you can remove from the sentence and the sentence still makes sense because they are independent, they're dependent clauses. So the travelers are very tired. Joe Polizzi is the foremost expert on creating content to increase traffic to your website. Perhaps the most successful character in Mad Men is Don Draper. So you can see how all of these are not necessary. They're extra information. And when we put them in, they have to be next to what they're modifying. Okay. All right, so if you want to modify appropriately, the Los Angeles Lakers have Kobe Bryant, one of the most celebrated team franchises in NBA history. So what am I modifying here? I want to be, but I'm saying one of the most celebrated team franchises. Maybe I should say one of the most celebrated players. That would fix this problem. Now we wouldn't have a misplaced modifier error. I could also say the Los Angeles Lakers, one of the most celebrated team franchises in NBA history, have Kobe Bryant. And in that case, we would also be modifying correctly. Coming home after serving 3 years in the military, Luther's family was excited to see him. So it's modifying Luther, but we're saying Luther's family, so that's the problem here. So yeah, I would have to sing home after serving 3 years in the military. Luther was excited to see his family, right? Something like that, because coming home after serving 3 years in the military is the modifier, and it's modifying Luther. Patty Miles, when she was the winner of the National Spelling Bee in 2010, won the National Science Bowl the next year. This was a little tricky. We're right next to the modifier, but we don't need this excess language. So it should be Patty Miles, the winner of the National Spelling Bee. So you want to say who Patty Miles was. She's the winner of the National Spelling Bee. I don't want to say Patty Miles when she was. So clear and concise. Modifiers should be just describing exactly the noun they're next to. When she was does not describe who Patty Miles is. All right, so interpret data. We have the same type of questions on the writing section. But here, the author will likely make a statement about the graphically displayed data, and then you will have to determine whether the author's assertion is beyond the scope of the graphic. So basically the same thing. We won't go over these again because we have the same exact examples. But yeah, so modify, interpret data, stay active. We talked about this. You want to use active voice. Remember here we are using mostly subject pronouns. Here we're using mostly object pronouns. Me, her, them. I aced the SAT. SAT was aced by me. Okay. In order to reduce light pollution, limits on porch lights have been set by the neighborhood community committee. How is this in the passive voice right now? Yeah, the word by exactly indicates. So I should say something like, in order to reduce light pollution, the neighborhood community committee has set limits on porch lights. Okay, that's better. Because new SAT strategies were learned, the students aced their exam on Saturday. It should be the students aced their exam on Saturday because they learned SAT strategies, right? Not because SAT strategies were learned, because they learned. Because I was in so much pain, prescription grade acetaminophen, which is just Tylenol, was prescribed by the physician. So the word by, once again, indicates passive voice. So I should say the physician prescribed. So I could say, because I was in so much pain, the physician prescribed prescription grade acetaminophen. Keep tense agreement. One major error on SAT writing is verb tense agreement. Absolutely. So if one verb is in the present tense, then other verbs the same sentence should be in the present tense. If one verb is in the past tense, then the other verbs should be in the past tense. The only exception is if there's a clear indication that the tense should change. So if I say something like, well, I have enjoyed summer, I look forward to school. So once again, you don't want to get caught up in the jargon, the names of different tenses. That's something you learn in Spanish class. But in English, it should be pretty straightforward. Just try to keep verb tenses consistent. Okay. So simple, I study, I studied, I will study. Continuous, I am studying, I was studying, I will be studying. Perfect, I have studied, I had studied, I will have studied. Perfect continuous, I have been studying, I had been studying, I will be studying. So perfect continuous in the present indicates something that's ongoing. I have been studying for the test. In the past, it would indicate I had been studying. It would indicate that you'd been studying before something else happened. And I will be studying will indicate in the future. I will be studying for the test. So when you have these, they usually indicate that they happen before something else happens. So I will be studying for the test before I go to school. Otherwise, if you just want to say I'm going to study, you would say I will study next week. Right? So that's kind of the difference. But simple tenses, action occurs in the present, past, or future. The simple tense is the standard present, past, and future that we think of. Most common simple tense is the present simple, and we use this tense to represent actions occurring at the current time or habitual actions, right? I lock the door before bed every night. Continuous, the action is continuing. The continuous tense is the same thing as the progressive tense. Most common progressive tense on the SAT is the past continuous. For example, I was studying. The past continuous tense refers to 3 types of actions. Action in the past was interrupted. So I was studying until my brother walked in the room. The action occurred at the same time as other actions. I was studying while she was eating. Or indicates atmosphere. Students were studying in the library. And perfect, the action is completed. Typically, the perfect tense is having either have or had. The most common perfect tense is the past perfect. For example, I had studied. Past perfect refers to actions that have occurred before another action in the past. Before basketball season started, I had studied a lot for the SAT. And perfect continuous. Think of this perfect continuous as either having had or had. The most common perfect continuous tense on the SAT is the present perfect. For example, I have been studying. Present perfect refers to actions that have occurred in the past but are continuing on into the present. So watch out for verb tense shifts between sentences. If they're illogical, then you need to take a step back. If I say something like, when Jackie and Sasha visited the museum, they had noticed their favorite painting was missing. It should be, when Jackie and Sasha visited the museum, they noticed. It can be in the same tense. Print almost 50 years after it has been written. The Sun Also Rises is still one of Ernest Hemingway's greatest works. So this should be printed almost 50 years after it was written. Past tense. Although the author never actually writing a book himself, he believed ghostwriters did the job just fine. Should be wrote. And lastly, for this section, we're going to talk about comparing correctly. You must make sure to compare similar items on the SAT. So you remember yesterday when I said we couldn't compare somebody to somebody else's artwork if that was not my intention? That's the same idea here. So comparison errors, they might not sound incorrect because we do comparison errors in everyday speech quite often. But if you think about what a comparison is literally saying, it's often ridiculous. So if I say 3 times as many pandas live in Asia as North America, this would have to be 3 times as many pandas live in Asia as live in North America. Okay. Because here I'm comparing pandas in Asia to North America, and that doesn't make sense. Like most famous musicians, Taylor Swift's vocal talents far surpass most people. So here I'm comparing Taylor Swift's vocal talents to other people. So I would have to say something like most famous musicians, Taylor Swift's vocal talents far surpass those of most people. So then we're comparing vocal talents to vocal talents. And Sydney, will there be specific questions about what type of tense the passage is using? No, there will not be. No worries about that. So that's why it's not really that important that you know the terms. All right, and then Henry is certainly faster than Julie and Andre. Okay, it should probably be Henry is certainly, if we're comparing more than Actually, I don't like this example. We're going to skip it. Basically, faster should compare two things. Fastest should compare more than two things. So you shouldn't use faster when you're talking about three people. You should say Henry is the fastest among Julie and Andre. Okay. So I told you that one went by really fast. So let's see. I guess we'll go ahead and take our lunch break. I'm going to stop the recording now and we'll restart after lunch.